When people hear the name Saudi Arabia, they usually imagine endless oil money, royal palaces, luxury lifestyles, and futuristic mega-projects rising out of the desert. But what almost nobody talks about is a far more uncomfortable possibility. Behind this image of unlimited wealth lies one of the most fragile economic systems in the modern world. Saudi Arabia is not just rich, it is dangerously dependent. The very resource that transformed it from a poor desert kingdom into a global power may now be pushing it toward its biggest economic test ever. Even in 2025, more than half of Saudi Arabia's entire GDP and nearly 80% of its government revenue still come directly from oil. This level of dependence would be risky for any country, especially at a time when the world is preparing for a post-oil future. This reliance goes much deeper than most people realize. It does not stop at energy exports or government budgets. It quietly controls almost every sector of the economy, including industries that appear independent on the surface. A clear example is agriculture. For decades, Saudi Arabia tried to grow wheat in the middle of the desert. On paper, it looked like a miracle. The country even became the sixth largest wheat exporter in the world at one point. But the reality was very different. The government was buying wheat from farmers at prices nearly 5 times higher than global market rates. Electricity, fuel, water, and fertilizers were all heavily subsidized using oil money. The industry was never competitive. It was an illusion funded by petroleum revenue. In total, this experiment cost the Saudi government around $85 billion. When it became impossible to justify, the program was quietly shut down in 2016. This pattern explains much of Saudi Arabia's economic history. Since oil was discovered nearly a century ago, the country has repeatedly attempted to diversify its economy. But instead of building competitive private industries, it relied on massive state spending, subsidies, and public employment. Today, nearly 70% of Saudi citizens are employed directly or indirectly by the government. This is an extraordinary figure. In most developed economies, that number is closer to 15 or 20%. This structure has reinforced an absolute monarchy, where economic and political power are concentrated within a single family. The Saudi royal family's estimated net worth of around $1.4 trillion makes it one of the wealthiest families in history. This centralized control allowed Saudi Arabia to rapidly expand oil production during the 1980s, increasing output from roughly 3 million barrels per day to over 10 million. But it also created an economy that lacks resilience. When oil prices rise, money flows everywhere. When prices fall, the entire system begins to crack. This vulnerability became painfully clear during the 2014 oil price crash. Global oversupply caused oil prices to fall by more than 50% in a short period. Saudi revenues were cut in half almost overnight. The budget deficit surged to nearly 15% of GDP, the highest in the country's history. For the first time in decades, the government was forced to borrow heavily, cut subsidies, and introduce taxes like VAT. Average household incomes fell sharply because there was no strong private sector to absorb the shock. This crisis revealed something fundamental. Saudi Arabia's economic model works only as long as oil money keeps flowing. And today, the global environment is changing faster than ever. Oil demand is expected to peak before 2030. Electric vehicles are rapidly replacing combustion engines. Renewable energy is now cheaper than fossil fuels in many regions. The United States and the European Union are investing hundreds of billions of dollars into clean energy. Even China, the world's largest oil importer, has committed to reaching net zero emissions by 2060. Saudi leaders are fully aware of this shift. That is why in 2016, the government launched Vision 2030. It was presented as one of the boldest economic reform plans in history. The goal was simple in theory. Use today's oil wealth to build tomorrow's non-oil economy. The plan promised massive investments in tourism, finance, entertainment, and technology. Oil's share of GDP was supposed to fall to 30%. Non-oil government revenue was meant to quadruple. Vision 2030 captured global attention through spectacular megaprojects. The most famous was Neom, a futuristic city in the desert, powered entirely by renewable energy. Within Neom was The Line, a 150-kilometer-long linear city designed to completely redefine urban living. There were also plans for a ski resort in the desert, luxury Red Sea tourism zones, and floating cities with futuristic designs. Many people assumed these projects must be part of a carefully calculated master plan. But as the years passed, reality began to diverge from the marketing. Costs spiraled out of control. Deadlines were repeatedly missed. Internal reviews reportedly revealed unrealistic assumptions and severe management problems. The line was dramatically scaled down from its original 150-kilometer vision to just around 2.5 kilometers. Meanwhile, total estimated costs for Vision 2030 projects ballooned beyond $1.5 trillion, nearly 3 times the original projections. To fund this gap, the Saudi government began drawing down its financial reserves. These reserves fell from around $750 billion a decade ago to roughly $400 billion today. At the current pace of spending, economists warn that these reserves could be exhausted by the mid-2030s. This has not gone unnoticed by global investors. Insurance against a Saudi debt default has risen sharply. Credit rating agencies have issued warnings. Borrowing costs are climbing. This matters because Saudi Arabia's strategy now depends heavily on cheap borrowing. Debt itself is not necessarily bad. Countries like the United States operate with very high debt-to-GDP ratios. But there is a crucial difference. The US has a diversified economy, deep financial markets, and multiple engines of growth. Saudi Arabia does not. Its fiscal health is still tied almost entirely to oil prices. After the post-Ukraine war oil price spike faded, prices fell back towards $70 to $80 per barrel. Aramco's profits dropped by roughly 25%. This cost the Saudi government more than $90 billion annually. Budget deficits returned. Public debt, which was just 2.2% of GDP in 2010, is projected to rise to around 43% by 2030. This creates a real risk of a debt spiral. If investor confidence weakens, borrowing costs rise. Higher interest payments force spending cuts. Slower growth further weakens confidence. Even a small increase in interest rates could add tens of billions of dollars to annual debt servicing costs. The real question then is whether Vision 2030 spending is actually productive. Debt can be sustainable if it funds investments that generate long-term growth. But evidence increasingly suggests that many flagship projects are struggling to deliver meaningful economic returns. Internal assessments reportedly indicate that only a small fraction of Neom may be completed by 2030. Tourism targets have been repeatedly revised downward. Employment gains are concentrated in construction rather than high-value industries. This stands in sharp contrast to countries like Norway. When Norway discovered oil in the North Sea, it chose a different path. It created a sovereign wealth fund, invested oil revenues globally, limited how much oil money could be used in the national budget, and built strong democratic institutions. Today, Norway's fund is worth over $1.6 trillion and finances healthcare, education, and long-term stability. Saudi Arabia, despite having far larger oil reserves, followed a model centered on centralized control, prestige projects, and heavy spending. That choice now leaves it far more exposed to economic shocks. And as the global energy transition accelerates, the old model may never return. Saudi Arabia's future now hangs in a delicate balance. Vision 2030 could succeed and become one of the most ambitious economic transformations in modern history. Or it could be remembered as one of the most expensive gambles ever attempted. The outcome will shape not only Saudi Arabia's future, but also global energy markets and geopolitics. Before this video ends, I want to know what you think. Do you believe Saudi Arabia is genuinely building a sustainable post-oil economy, or is it simply delaying an inevitable adjustment with expensive mega-projects? Share your honest opinion in the comments. And if you want more fact-based deep dives that go beyond headlines and explain how global economic decisions really shape our future, Make sure you stay connected for what comes next.